Good evening, everybody. If you would like to get settled, we'll start exactly at 7, and we are going through until 8 o'clock. So I'll wait till the numbers align to 7 o'clock officially, but please make sure if you want to ask a question that you have a card to write it on. Okay, 7 o'clock. Once again, good evening. My name is Yara Burnett. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Greenwich League of Women Voters, and I am the organizer of this debate. Tonight's debate continues the League's tradition of presenting candidates to the voters, making it possible for the voters to ask questions of both candidates and perceive the difference between the two of them. Our moderator is Jean Rabinow from the Bridgeport Area League, and she will introduce the candidates in just a little bit. Audience questions will be in writing, and we have provided you either with index cards and a pencil. If you don't have it, just raise your hand and somebody will come and bring it to you. We have a screening committee that will look through the questions for two reasons: to avoid duplication and to make sure that the topic that is being asked is within the purview of the Office of the Tax Collector. I think I've already mentioned, the questions have to be addressed to both candidates. Our next pre-election event is the meet and greet for RTM candidates at Central Middle School Gym, and that'll be on Sunday, October 29th from 3 to 5. As every year, we are preparing a voter's guide for all candidates for running in Greenwich. It will be a pull-out sheet in the Greenwich Time that will be published on November 3rd. It will also be on our website, and I hope also on the Greenwich Time website. In addition to that, because we have so many candidates for the RTM, we are doing an electronic-only RTM guide that will be published on the League website. And again, we hope that the Greenwich Time will be interested to put it on their website. And we are hoping to go live with it within the next couple of days. It's a real comprehensive information on RTM candidates. One final thought: the absentee ballots are now available. If you know that you are not going to be here election day, we would like to have you get your absentee ballot at your earliest convenience. Thank you very much for being here, and now I turn it over to Jean, who will introduce the candidates. Jean.
Thank you, Yara. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to be here from the Bridgeport area, where I am on the steering committee of the League. The candidates tonight have drawn for order of appearance. The first question will go to Mr. Ladonia first, followed by Mr. Richmond. After each question has been answered by both candidates will have an opportunity to extend their remarks or to rebut if they feel that they want to do so, but it will be optional. Each question, the candidates can take up to 1.5 minutes. Rebuttals or extensions are limited to 30 seconds. At the end of the evening, each candidate will be given a 2-minute closing remark on any topic of his choice. If everybody is okay, we are going to start the first question with Mr. Ladonia. What are the needed qualifications to be an effective tax collector, and how does your experience fit?
Well, first, thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting the forum tonight. Tonight, you will undoubtedly hear many fallacies and inaccurate statements from my opponent spun to sound like facts. I have had the honor of representing the people of Greenwich for the past 8 years, and I'm proud to know that you all know the difference. The qualifications to be a tax collector vary from town to town. In a situation where it's an appointed person, the town can make up whatever qualifications they would like. In an elected situation, just like any elected position, there are no qualifications that are necessary other than to be an elector of the town. And the one qualification that is important that we all strive for as tax collectors is the certification from the Connecticut Tax Collectors Association. I have acquired that and have continued my education and continue to participate with my fellow tax collectors in seminars and educational meetings.
Okay, Mr. Richmond?
Thank you, Jean and Yara and the League of Women Voters and everybody who came out for this today. I think there are a couple of qualifications that you need for doing any kind of a job like this, and those are having a business background, which I have for 35 years in the magazine advertising business, doing finances, doing business, doing advertising, as well as being able to deal with people, because this is the type of job where you are dealing with the public all the time. So you've got to be able to deal with people, you've got to be able to deal with the entities involved, you've got to be able to be a team player. And that's important in this town because there are different functions of government. And I think the tax collector needs to be able to work with the Board of Estimate and Taxation and work with the town assessor and work with the town controller. All of those I can do. I've always been a team player. I've always been able to work with groups, and those are important functions.
All right. Mr. Ladonia, do you wish to extend your remarks in any way?
Sure. I have to agree with what Howard said, and I'm happy to say that I do work with all those people, and sometimes I don't agree with them, but that's what democracy is all about. And the final result is our collection rate is one of the highest in the state. We have no issues with anything going on in the office, so I think I qualify for all those things.
All right. Mr. Richmond, anything further?
I don't think that this tax collector works with the Board of Estimate and Taxation the way he should, okay? It's been, for the last 2 years, there's been a friction between the tax collector and the Board of Estimate and Taxation, which led to a cut of $50,000 in the budget. And I just don't see that work has been flowing on an even keel.
All right. Next question goes to Mr. Richmond first. And a couple of people have asked this. Is the tax collector's office run efficiently, and how do you measure that efficiency?
No, it's not. It's not being run efficiently because in the last 6 months, tax bills have not been going, deposits have not been put in on a timely basis. This has been documented. The tax collector had $116 million of checks on his desk sometime in late August, which cost the town maybe $70,000 or $80,000 of interest. Refunds have not been going out. Court orders have not been processed. When you go to court and you go to the highest level and you hire an attorney and you get a court order and you get a tax reduction, you're supposed to see it. Well, that hasn't been happening. People haven't been seeing that. Credit card chargebacks have not been they've not been properly input into the system. You pay your taxes by credit card. You then don't want to pay the fee. You tell your bank, "I want my money back." You get your money back, and the system still shows that the tax has been paid. So therefore, what you now have is like you're creating a tax delinquent in a way, because the system shows the tax has been paid, but it really hasn't. So I don't think this office is working efficiently at all, and that's one of the reasons I'm running this year on a totally different platform from which I ran on 2 years ago.
All right, Mr. Ladonia.
The office runs extremely efficiently. We are the office with one of the lowest budgets in the town overall budget. Efficiency is not necessarily measured by dollars, but I have some statistics that show for every dollar spent in the town of Greenwich to collect taxes, we collect $702. The next closest municipality in Fairfield County is the town of the town of New Canaan, who collects from 700 to 563. Comparable towns like Danbury, same population, They collect $334 for every dollar spent. So the efficiency of the office is pretty obvious. All of the issues that Mr. Richmond brings up are not really issues. They're simply a change in the priorities of the way things are done. Once the BET made a very large cut to the budget and the staff had to be cut, priorities had to be changed, people had to be retrained, and the obvious first priority is to collect the money. Monies are never deposited immediately. We go through 100,000 payments a year. And with a staff of 4, you can just imagine what the logistics are for that.
Okay. Anything further, Mr.
Yeah,
Richmond?
I just think this shows a non-management function realizing that there was going to be a problem come the spring of 2017 when the BET had cut the department budget $50,000. So that was obvious in July 2016. So roll it around 9 months when 2 people had to be let go and the work couldn't be done. That's a management function. And I think that whoever the tax collector is should be able to be on top of that and make sure the system flows smoothly.
Mr. Ladonia, anything further?
Yes, I think that the people responsible for making the cuts should accept the responsibility for the ramifications of the cuts. I have been telling people, the Budget Committee in particular, of the BET since 2013, when I was in a Budget Committee meeting and they began making cuts to my budget, that anything that they did in the future would cause ramifications to services to the town, people, and the town departments. Not that we're not providing the services, they just take longer to do.
All right. Next one goes to Mr. Ladonia first. The tax collector's office is responsible for collecting the major portion of town revenues. Briefly, how is it done and how safe is the process?
The process is extremely safe. As you know, we collect somewhere upwards of $370 million last year, all accounted for. We use a lockbox bank that does truly finishes about 30 to 35% of our processing. The rest have to be processed manually. The thing that people don't ever talk about is they assume that every payment that comes in with the proper documentation. Checks are all written to the exact amount. The average person doesn't understand the tax collection function, and why should they? We spend a lot of time, human touch, dealing with taxpayers, dealing with townspeople, dealing with all kinds of stakeholders in the office of the tax collector to make sure that all of these things are processed properly, and they are.
Mr. Richmond.
There are 3 ways to pay your taxes in town. One is to send in the green envelope, which goes right to the treasurer, and then it goes directly into the account. The second way is sending it to Town Hall Tax Collector, 101 Field Point Road, and it goes to the tax collector's office. That has to be deposited manually. The third way is going to the window, and it's still in the tax collector's office, and that has to be deposited manually. My issue has been, again, that these checks have not been deposited in a timely manner, whereas the money going through the Treasury is being deposited right away. There's got to be a better system to make this happen so that the town gets its money right away and it doesn't lose interest, and the taxpayers are told they've paid their bills so they know they're okay, and that's kind of where it's at.
Okay, Mr. Ladonia, anything further?
Yes, well, Mr. Richmond doesn't obviously understand the way that these payments are applied. Nothing goes directly to the treasurer. All the green envelopes are collected by the administrative people that go to the P.O. box, all to us. Everything goes through our office. Nothing goes directly to the treasurer. And there is a 4th option for people to make payments, and that's online.
All right, Mr. Richmond, anything further?
I was going to say the online is fine, but again, one of the issues is people don't like to pay the 2.5% credit card charge. So I think that shies them away. One of the things maybe down the road is that if the town could build it in somehow so that people wouldn't have to absorb that charge, it might encourage them to pay online more.
All right. Next question goes to Mr. Richmond first. How aggressively does the town of Greenwich collect delinquent taxes, and is there any way in which that process should be improved?
Delinquent taxes are kind of at the discretion of the tax collector, and I think everything should be taken into account, being the person's financial status, where they are, how long they've been here. And one thing I would do if I became the tax collector is certainly work with people on that basis. Having said that, the state statute is, and the encouragement for people to pay is, it's 1.5% per month, which is turns out to be 18% a year. So that hopefully the delinquencies won't continue. But having said that, you want to work with people at least to understand the situation and be able to help them out. In a lot of instances, older people, there are ways to do it, like reverse mortgages. So if you have somebody who's been in a house that was $200,000 40 years ago and it's now worth $4 million and the taxes have gone up, they can do a reverse mortgage. I would work with people like that in the office.
Mr. Ladonia?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, sir. How aggressively does the town of Greenwich collect delinquent taxes, and is there any way in which that process should be improved?
We are aggressive in the collecting of all taxes. We have an accomplished collection rate that is one of the highest in the state. So the percentage of delinquent taxes in each year is has hovered in my tenure somewhere less than 0.5% a year, which is less than what the BET budget's for. So we're ahead of the curve there. And Howard is exactly right. The reason that people need an elected tax collector is so they know that they have a representative in the office who lives in town, who understands their dilemmas. People's, because we're Greenwich, we're misunderstood by many, many people. I deal with all the tax collectors all over the state, and it's interesting that all of our problems are the same. Ours just happen to have more zeros on them. But we work with everyone to the extent that we can, and we treat everyone the same.
Mr. Richmond, do you want to say anything further on that?
Nope.
Okay. Mr. Ladonia, do you want to extend in any way?
No, but I'd like to address something that Howard neglected to mention on the online payments. There is an option to make an online payment with an electronic fund transfer for 95 cents. They do not have to pay 2.95%. You cannot build interest into the payment because that would be tantamount to giving a discount on your taxes.
All right. Next question goes to Mr. Ladonia first, and it's a follow-up. What should the tax collector's policy be regarding collecting back taxes due for abandoned properties?
The policy is that the taxes continue to accrue with interest. I don't know of any abandoned properties that have come onto our radar. Usually, if someone leaves a house and abandons it, there is some financial interest somewhere else, and we work with whoever it is that will take control of the property.
Okay. Mr. Richmond?
In walking in Byram a few weeks ago, there are some properties, I don't know what the definition of abandoned is, but there are some properties that have been there for years, becoming dilapidated. I don't know if the taxes have been paid on them, but if they haven't, the tax collector's office should certainly get involved with that, because something's got to be done. Either those taxes have to be paid, or the properties need to be sold, or the town needs to take over the properties and sell them itself.
Anything further?
Sure. The key is you don't know whether the taxes are paid. If the taxes are paid, the tax collector has absolutely no authority to step into it at all. And in the worst case scenario, if the taxes are not paid, the tax collector also has no authority to pick and choose individual properties to do anything about.
Anything further?
Well, but the tax collector can go after any property that's unpaid, so every property, if there are unpaid properties, should be gone after as soon as possible.
All right, thank you both. Next question goes to Mr. Richmond first. Using your business experience, what management practices would you utilize to improve the job performance of employees you supervise?
Communication. Communication with the people you work with is important. I've been in management positions a number of times over my career, and I think communication is the most important thing. I also think doing personnel evaluations on them is important, and I know for a fact that the personnel evaluations were not done from this tax collector's office certainly 2 years ago, and I don't know about the last fiscal year. So I think that needs to be done because that tells employees what needs to be done and shows how to work with them. And the whole idea is, as a manager, is to make somebody a better employee. You have A players, B players, and C players in this world, and what you want to do is you want to take each different player and make them work up to their capacity.
Okay, Mr. Ladonia?
I think the exact things that Howard talks about are accomplished in the office. We have a great working rapport in the office of the tax collector. Everyone is willing to help everyone else out. We talk about any issues that may come. Communication is at the forefront of everything we do. As far as employee evaluations go, I'm certainly not going to say that I did fill them out last year, but again, I have to prioritize what I can do in the time that I have to do it. And to be quite honest and blunt, employee evaluations only matter in a union situation if you're trying to fire the person. That does not get the person any extra money. There's no bonuses. There's no, I pat them on the back and do the things that need to be done in the office. And an excellent employee evaluation is not going to gain anything for them.
Anything further, Mr.
I
Richmond?
think an excellent employee evaluation gains something all the time, because if I'm an employee and somebody tells me I'm doing a really good job, it's incentive. Whether or not money comes with it, it makes incentive for me and it makes me want to work harder.
Mr. Ladonia, anything further?
Good.
All right. Next question starts with Mr. Ladonia first. What, if any, are the policymaking duties of the tax collector?
Policymaking duties of the tax collector really boil down to the type of collection practices that you're going to use. Whether you're going to go into onerous practices, as I call them, convening tax sales, using, there are a lot of people in the tax collection world who send out letters on a very regular basis. Unfortunately, our budget has been cut to the bone, and believe it or not, even the cost of doing something like that is almost impossible in our office. The other policy discussions, we work under the policy guidance of the BET from a standpoint of how they want the money accounted for. And other than that, there really are no policy decisions.
Mr. Richmond?
The tax collector, I just want to say, has no authority to set the mill rate or the assessment, so that's certainly not a policy. And I guess it is, again, collecting taxes in a timely manner, and as the tax collector said, you can mail delinquent notices out, you can close restaurants if they're not paying their taxes, you can sell delinquent houses, but as for policies, it's not really a standard policy.
All right. Anything further, Mr. Ladonia? And Mr. Richmond, anything further? All right. This question was a follow-up to one that was asked earlier, and it goes to Mr. Richmond first. What will you do to more timely deposit the tax receipts? I think they're looking for specifics.
I'd process them every day that they came in. The town charter says they should be deposited within a week. It suggested that anything over $500 be deposited daily. And I've been doing my own checkbook since I'm a 17-year-old kid. And I know how to deposit, and I know how to balance, and I know how to get things done. And that's what I do. And I would make it timely the way it's supposed to be. Again, what I said before is when you have $116 million of checks sitting on a desk, it's about $78,000. If the average household tax bill is $11,000. That's 7 houses of taxes that are going up in smoke. Or that's an employee in the department. So I just think this stuff, it needs to go in as soon as it comes in.
Mr. Ladonia.
Interesting that Mr. Richmond would say that's an employee in the department. If we had the employee in the department, possibly they would be processed quicker. The whole idea that we're sitting around and twiddling our thumbs or surfing the internet and not processing the payments as they come in is just absurd. Mr. Richmond has never stepped foot in the office of the tax collector and has no idea the logistics and how things work. Just as a simple example, when people do online payments, they think they paid online, but it's really through their online banking system. What happens is their bank will actually batch a number of checks. And we may get one envelope from a bank that has 100 checks in it. Well, that 100 checks certainly doesn't go through the lockbox. That 100 checks, each check has to be individually looked at, manually processed. If the account number is not on it, if the bill number is not on it, if the parcel number is not on it, the clerk has to manually determine where to apply this money based on the name that's on the check. So it's not a simple process. It's not a bucket you throw money into and everybody throws in exactly the right amount of money. All of these things take time and there's a lot of manual processing, and it requires a number of people to do that processing.
Mr. Richmond, anything further?
Mr. Ladonia's budget is set by the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and he just mentioned they're lacking on employees for whatever reason. And I know he thinks that the BET and some certain member of the BET had a vendetta against him 2 years ago when the motion was made to cut first his salary and then the tax collector department, which it turned into by $50,000. The point is, if the BET is funding you and you have a good relation with the BET, as my late mother once said, you kill more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Now, if I get elected tax collector, we'll pick it up later.
Mr. Ladonia, anything further?
Yes. Just as a comparison, the city of Bridgeport, we have the largest grand list in the state, but the city of Bridgeport has 13 people in their office. Bristol, the small town of Bristol, has 6. Danbury has 9. Fairfield, 7. Hamden, 4. Meriden, 6. New Haven and Norwalk, 8. 22 in Waterbury. So we're now operating with 4, collecting the largest grand list in the state.
Okay. It's time on both of you. Next question goes to Mr. Ladonia first. Do you think you would run the tax department any differently if you are elected or re-elected? If so, how?
Well, I think that it's hard to make major changes in a department that has been extremely successful in the time that I've been there. Our collection rate has stayed over 99.5% for the 8 years I've been there, which helps the town from a standpoint of its fiscal standing with bond rating companies. We are trying to retrain and work within the new parameters that we have, and every day we analyze the situation and figure out what we need to do. So I wouldn't tell you that I'm going to make any major changes right now, but we make changes that we think are more efficient every day. And I think that the BET has a problem understanding the definition of the word efficiency. They think it's cost cutting. Cost cutting and efficiency aren't necessarily the same thing. Sometimes efficiency costs more money.
All right, Mr. Richmond?
Having not been in the tax collector's office working for 8 years, it's a little tough from the outside to be able to say what would actually be done because you don't know how the day-to-day process works. But again, I would do, if I'm elected, I would get in there obviously and oversight it and look to see what's going on and see how all the processes work and take the time to learn how the office does work before then making suggestions.
Anything further, Mr. Ladonia?
No.
Okay. Next question will go to Mr. Richmond first. Can you tell us some more about employee performance evaluations? Aren't they required by town policy, and don't they help employees improve their performance?
Yes and yes. They're required, they're not done. And as I said before, I think employee evaluations always help employees get better. And the interesting thing, they're really tough to do when you're a manager. They're very hard to do. And that is a skill, doing something that an employee will learn something from. But I think, yes, they are required, and yes, they should be done.
All right, Mr. Ladonia.
I do employee evaluations every day in the office. I communicate with the people that work for me. They know exactly what their situation is. They know whether they're performing properly or they're not performing properly. It is a policy to have these employee evaluations done, but if you look at the overall scheme of things, I don't want to talk about other departments because that's not what we're here for, but employee evaluations are simply pieces of paper that get filed in the HR department.
Mr. Richmond, anything further?
Not on that, but I'm going to go back to something where the stop sign came up before when I was talking about if I do get elected and working with the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and I was in the middle of saying, I think my mother taught me you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So if I don't see any reason to go back to the Board of Estimate and Taxation, explain the situation, and who knows, they might bring money back into the department. I'm putting all 12 of them on the spot.
Anything further, Mr. Ladonia?
It's very hard to work with some people who are obviously openly trying to undermine the authority of an office and hurt the efficiency of the office. And you can have all the honey you want, but if there's partisan politics involved, there's nothing that's going to be done.
All right, this next question, being from out of town, I'm not sure if it's correct, but the town's tax collection rate, this one goes to Mr. Ladonia first. The town's tax collection rate continues to be virtually 100%. Do the attacks on the Office of the Tax Collector risk damaging the town's well-deserved reputation for superior financial management?
Yes. The attacks on the Office of the Tax Collector are very confusing to the people that work in the Office of the Tax Collector. As a result, there could be a morale issue if the communication line wasn't as direct as it is. When they constantly are hearing or reading that the partisan politics that's being played in the BET to attack me, and I don't know whether it's attacks of me as a person or me as an officer or whatever you may call it, but when the chairman of the DTC sits on the budget committee and 1 month after the previous election starts attacks on the office, you have to believe there's a big problem there.
Okay, Mr. Richmond?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, sir. The town's tax collection rate continues to be virtually 100%. Do the attacks on the Office of the Tax Collector risk damaging the town's well-deserved reputation for superior financial management?
I don't know that I would call them attacks. I think I would just call them actually maybe performance evaluations. I'm just coming from the BET, coming from a different area. Yeah, I'm sure it is tough in there for some of the morale for the working people. But again, it goes back to making the department function as well as it can at the highest level.
Okay. Anything further?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
The office is functioning very well. Priorities have had to shift because of change in workflow. The tax collection process is an integral part of the town's financial reputation and should not be used as a pawn by the opposition. The town's taxpayers and town departments will both have to deal with different level of services if unprovoked attacks are allowed to continue. Those responsible need to step forward and accept the consequences of their actions.
Mr. Richmond?
I don't know if Mr. Ladonia is referring to me as the opposition or the BET, but I don't really feel like there are attacks coming from the opposition.
All right. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Richmond. Does the town send tax lien certificates on overdue taxes, and if not, should it?
The town has two choices. They can either do tax liens, which then can be negotiated into settlements with taxpayers, or the other alternative is they can just sell the property. So tax liens are an option, one of two.
All right, Ms.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Does the town send tax lien certificates on overdue taxes, and if not, should it?
I'm assuming you mean sell tax lien certificates,
It
not
says-
send.
So
It could be either one. I apologize. This
Okay.
is handwritten.
It's okay, because we do tax liens. We do put tax liens. Well, actually, as soon as a property is assessed, there's a lien attached to it. It's something called an inchoate lien, which is not a written. And what we have to do is we put in a written lien and record that in the the town clerk's office to continue that lien for the life of it. Now, as far as selling tax liens, that is a process that I find very onerous. It takes you are essentially, I would be giving my authority as the tax collector to a for-profit individual, and I just don't agree with that from a basic philosophy.
Anything further, Mr. Richmond?
nothing.
Okay. And nothing further, Mr. Ladonia?
No.
Okay. Next one goes to Mr. Ladonia first. I hope I'm reading this right. Do you think the office should process the actual checks or rather photocopy the checks and then that part I can read, but is this word rather something about photocopy the checks and then deposit the checks? I'm not sure. Oh, I think I see what they're saying. They're saying, do you just photocopy the checks and deal with how you write them on the books, or should you process the whole thing first before depositing? I think is the question. It goes to Mr. Ladonia first.
Well, considering that we have to be accountable for every penny that of the $370 million that we deposit in the course of a year, making photocopies and depositing things immediately, I think that adds another. You're talking about adding another layer of touching, which we try to avoid. The fewer touch points you can have, the better we are, which is why we utilize the lockbox as much as we possibly can. Unfortunately, everything that comes in the green envelope that Howard thinks goes to the treasurer goes to the lockbox, and they then process these trays, literally trays every day for a month of green envelopes that we get, and probably return out of those. I'll bet they return 40% of the envelopes that we send to them for a wrong amount, no account number on it, doesn't match the invoice that was in it, the name isn't the same as the name on the account, for whatever reason. And then, again, those now have to be processed manually. So every day, there's manual processing of all payments.
Okay, Mr. Richmond?
Let me hear the question again.
Yeah. Do you think the office should process the actual checks, or rather photocopy the checks and then deposit them?
You know, I'm listening to the photocopy thing. I would think there was probably a way to set up a fast scanner so that if a bunch of checks come in at the same time, they can just be scanned in literally electronically in a fast manner and then deposited. That's how I can answer based on the question.
Anything further, Mr. Ladonia?
Sure, they are.
All right. Anything further?
Good.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? All right. This is going to be the last question before the closing then. A couple of people have asked it, and it's been touched on. Do you feel the position should be elected or appointed, and why? And this goes to Mr. Richmond first.
I'm shocked this question lasted 45 minutes. As you're going to hear me say in a couple of minutes, So I don't want to give away my closing argument here. 2 years ago, my whole platform was it should be appointed. This is 2 years later, and I have a different view on it, and I'm going to stop at that now because, again, I will cover that in my closing statement.
Okay, Mr. Ladonia?
I'm obviously on record as believing that it should be an elected position. We have 3 full-time elected representatives of the people of the town of Greenwich in the town hall on a full-time basis in the town hall on a daily basis. I think I believe that's not enough. People need to understand when they come into the office of the tax collector that it's a fellow citizen, someone that lives and breathes and works and pays the taxes and does all the same things that they do, because it provides an awful lot of confidence for them in being able to confide in the person and understand that the confidentiality, it's the relationship that I have with a lot of people is that the doctor-patient kind of a relationship where they tell me some very intimate details of their lives and an explanation of things, and we try to work things out for however it needs to be. So it's also less expensive to have an elected collector than it is to have an appointed person. All the appointed collectors make probably, well, not all of them, but in a same kind of a situation with the same kind of a grand list, they're making 50% more than the elected tax collector's making.
All right, anything further, or do you want to go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just so the audience knows, people change their views, and this is 2 years later, and that was my position 2 years ago, and I was 100% staunch about that position. If I got elected now, that is something that, with among a number of other things, that I would want to consider when getting into the office and working with everybody. So that is not 100% the way I was 2 years ago on it.
Mr. Ladonia, anything further?
Well, I find it interesting that Mr. Richmond, after he ran a complete campaign based on that and was soundly defeated, found his way into being rewarded for running with a job as the deputy registrar of voters, and now is back to wanting to be the tax collector. So I'm not sure where his mindset is. Does he want to represent the voters of the town of Greenwich, or does he want to represent the taxpayers?
Do I get to speak on that or not?
I'm sorry, you both had rebuttal on this. Rules is rules, guys. At this point, there not being any other questions, I am pleased to announce that we are at the 2-minute closing statements. By the luck of the rotation, Mr. Ladonia will go first.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum tonight. Thank you to everyone who personally attended. And thank you to everybody watching on some kind of a device. I've had the distinct honor to represent the citizens of Greenwich in the Office of Tax Collector the past 8 years. I've accomplished several goals that I set early in my tenure, not by myself, but through cooperative efforts working with other town departments and, of course, the professional staff of the Tax Collector's Office. Taxpayers now have new avenues for researching tax information, billing options, and payment options. Our collection rate has consistently ranked as one of the highest in the state. I've encouraged the staff to attain certification, and we all continue to training and education. I've continued to extend my network of professional collectors through membership in various tax collector associations, and have earned the respect of my fellow collectors in Fairfield County, now serving my 2nd term as Vice President of our County Tax Collectors Association. The reason we're here tonight is to vet candidates for the job of tax collector. My record speaks for itself. We have maintained a consistent history of strong collection rates. All people are treated the same. While partisan politics through budgetary means affect the services that my office is able to provide, no partisan politics play a role in the job that I perform. On Election Day, you will be voting for the person you believe will be the best person to represent you and do the best job as tax collector. I believe my record proves that I am that person. I ask you to vote for me, Todd Ladonia, for tax collector on November 7th. Thank you, and
Thank
God
you.
bless America.
Thank you. Mr. Richmond.
2 years ago, my platform was that the tax collector should be appointed and not elected. It is an issue that still resonates. Obviously, it was a question here also being posed as a question to the Republican Board of Estimate and Taxation candidates at their forum before the primary last month. This election season, I'm running for tax collector for a totally different reason. Problems in the office need to be fixed. The tax collector's job performance since April has been dismal. In August, the tax collector had checks sitting on his desk to the tune of $116 million, causing the town to lose thousands of dollars in interest. State statute and the town charter say deposits are to be made within 1 week. Some of those deposits were taking 5. The tax collector did not process court orders mandating reductions to tax bills. Think about this. How would you feel as a taxpayer after going to the highest level possible, investing time and money in legal fees, winning a court case that mandated a tax reduction, and your tax bill is still not adjusted? Not a good scenario. There is more. The tax collector did not process credit card chargebacks. That's taxpayers having their credit card companies refund payments because they did not want to pay a credit card fee. Those accounts were recorded as being fully paid when the initial transaction was completed. No adjustment was made after the credit card payment was returned. With no follow-up from the tax collector's office, in effect, the town is now creating tax delinquents. This tax collector has been in the job for 8 years. It is time for a change and fresh ideas. The job requires the ability to be a team player. If elected, I will work with the Board of Estimate and Taxation, the town assessor, and the town comptroller. I will get CCMC certification at the earliest possible date. I will bring 35 years of business, financial, and management experience to this job. I am asking you to vote for me. Please vote Box 4A for Howard Richmond on November 7th. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I have a couple of things to say, in addition to thanking all those of you who submitted questions and the candidates for sticking to the topic, which I appreciate. If you are going to be voting by absentee ballot, remember that it's a two-step process. You must submit an absentee ballot application before you get the absentee ballot and send it back to your town clerk's office. The other thing is, there is still time to register to vote. Most of you are registered, but you may have friends or children who are not. Please make sure that they get registered cutoff, which is 7 days before the election. You can register on election day, but it's a slower process, and if you're not registered by 8 o'clock, you can't vote. So I'm begging all of you, make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and get to the polls November 7. Thank you.